So I had a career in finance over quite a long time, but I also spent the first 10 years of my life in West Africa, and I've basically been an environmentalist all my life. And I was deputy chairman of a partnership of 120 national environmental NGOs. And our focus was really on avoiding species extinction, and so managing large areas of habitat to stop species going extinct. And so over the last sort of decade, we've been looking at our experience. How can our experience be relevant to averting the disastrous consequences of climate change? Now, this is a graph which I'm sure will be very familiar to all of you, but as an investment analyst, I'm basically trained to try to identify those areas that maybe have been slightly overlooked, because that's often where the best investment opportunities are. And so I think most people don't, I mean, everybody pretty much knows that atmospheric CO2 was 280 in 1800, but not a lot of people seem to know that in 1957 it was 315. So it went up by 35 parts per million in 150 years, and 85 in the last 50 years. So, I mean, that I think is pretty relevant to the debate. And another interesting set of statistics is that if we look at 2 of the last 3 interglacials, we peaked at 300 parts per million, 1 degree Celsius warmer temperatures, and 9 meters higher sea level. So what we've looked at, the area of particular interest for us is red, reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation. And what we noticed is that degradation has been largely overlooked and the emissions are not counted. And one of the reasons, so if you can see this slide, the idea is to illustrate degradation from 1 at the top left-hand corner is a pristine forest, down to 9 is bare land. And the FAO definition of a forest, of course, is at least 10% of the land area should be covered with trees at least 5 meters in height. So that's stage 8. So a lot of people talk about deforestation statistics, but we would assert that these are not a good proxy for forest and terrestrial emissions at all, because most of the damage has already happened before deforestation. And so a couple of statistics. We've been working with the World Resources Institute. There's this is a very distinguished organization in Washington, representative here in the audience from their Indian office. And we would, well, we've calculated a couple of things. One is that we believe that emissions from forests, from human destruction of forests, have been 3 times the level of emissions from burning fossil fuels. And secondly, if forests could recover 1/4 of the biomass that they've lost, that would reduce atmospheric CO2 from 400 to 280. So we think it is really important to manage the remaining forest land. There's still about 1/3 of the land area of the planet is covered with forest and woodland, obviously most of it in a degraded state. And we believe that that needs considerable attention. And it's unbelievably cheap. So we've seen all these slides previously about the costs of avoiding 1 ton of CO2. Forest recovery is an order of magnitude cheaper than anything else. And so what we've developed is a public-private partnership. So a very large proportion of the world's forest land is government-owned. It needs, in our view, private sector capital and commercial expertise. And then what we need to do is we need to reinvigorate the carbon offset credit market, where we believe there's scope at the moment for corporate and bilateral interest. And the consequences are, well, you know what? If you conserve your forests, you get watershed protection and huge benefits, huge local co-benefits for very often the poorest 5% of the world's population. And we believe that you can generate investment returns both for the private sector capital and for the owners of the land, the public sector owners of the land. And so I'm not sure, you probably can't read these words, but what we're saying is that forest recovery gives you watershed protection, safeguards water quality, avoids landslides and flooding, creates employment, assists in the achievement of local development goals, can enable revenue sharing with government partners, and most importantly, mitigates climate change and averts climate disaster. And so just a little case study of something that, and we're working on a number of projects around the world, and one in Ghana in West Africa is the pilot Red Plus project for Ghana. And it's about to be declared as a national park contingent on carbon financing. But it's the source of fresh water for about 5 million people, which is about 25% of the population in that country. And actually, it's a chain of hills covered with forest that's comprised of bauxite. And the plan was to demolish the hills. But actually, it would have removed the fresh water for these 5 million people, and the cost of an alternative water supply would have been absolutely astronomical. So we've heard earlier, I mean, Ivo's been talking very eloquently about true costing of natural capital and all this sort of stuff. Well, this is a practical example of a public-private partnership which is actually addressing the problem. And so, not wishing to overstay my welcome, that's it. Thank you.